These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they're described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. The devil came to my confessional booth and confessed to me that things horrible beyond comprehension have seized control of hell. Heaven is next. Of all the nights for the devil to visit, he chose one that was calm. No great storms, no loud bashes of lightning and thunder. It was a quiet evening, cloudless, the stars blotted out by the lights of the city. I was on the late shift at the confessional booth. It was the 11th hour, and no one had yet come to use my services. I was nodding off in my chair when the door to the other side of the booth was pulled open. Someone stepped in and sat down. I had heard no one enter the cathedral. The approach of a potential confessor was usually accompanied by great and echoed footsteps as they traversed the stone floor to the wooden cubicle. This one had come in so silently that until the moment they pulled open the door, I had believed myself to be alone. I was still in a state of half-doze, so I blinked several times to wake myself and turned to view the confessor through the grate. I could not make out their faces through the wooden screen, and the shadow which filled their compartment obscured most of their finer features. But I could tell that they were male and that they were dressed richly. The confessor wore a suit that looked exquisite, and from the clinking sound his hands made, I could tell they were covered with rings. They glinted and cast strange warped light rays on the ceiling that reminded me of ancient worms wriggling in primordial ooze. "Good evening, Father." That voice, smooth as oil, like the glint off of a freshly sharpened knife, with the note of a coin just flipped. Pure, almost celestial in origin. It rolled pleasingly on my ears, and I was brought to ease. "Forgive me, for I have sinned. It has been eons uncounted since my last confession." Despite the smoothness of his voice, his words struck an uncertain chord within me. "That is an unusual beginning, my son." The man chuckled. "Allow me to explain, Father. I am Lucifer. I have serviced an expansive and varied area when it comes to saints and sinners." This was not the first time I had been in the booth and heard the person on the other side admit to being the devil. Most times, such delusions did not interfere with the process. I treated them as any other, spoke to them of their wrongdoings, and tried to give a modicum of hope that they would be made whole, that one day they would be free of their fevered mind. This man was different. It must have been the growing dread I felt at his arrival, but I looked at him more closely through the divider. His eyes found mine, and I saw them clearly, even though his face was still shrouded in the gloom. Brown irises were so dark they were almost black. As I searched, I noted he bore none of the popular hallmarks of the Prince of Darkness. No horns, goat's hooves, or the smell of sulfur. This man had the smell of cheap wine and the vestments of an investment broker. But in my heart, the truth of the matter grew like a weed. I cannot deny it. I was convinced by the darkness the man had brought and the unease I felt in the corners of my mind. It was the same primeval instinct that tells animals they are in the presence of a predator. He was not lying, my confessor. As sure as I would know Christ if he walked through my door, I knew this being to be the devil himself. My mouth went dry. My mind went silent, and the only words I could utter were those which had been ingrained into me by habit. "Do you wish to confess?" The devil laughed. It was a soft sound, 2 parts pain and 1 part joyless mirth. It filled the whole space, but made everything feel hollow. When he spoke again, I noticed his voice slurred slightly, like one inebriated. "I suppose I have. It sounds odd even to me. I didn't know that I would come here until my feet took the path." I waited. My tongue had frozen to the roof of my mouth. I fear my immortal soul if I were to say the wrong thing to Satan. The devil took my silence as an offering of compliance. "I hope you will understand if I do not make the sign of the cross, considering present company. Quite all right, my son. Lucifer is fine, father. I swallowed. I reminded myself I was in a place of God, that the devil held no power here. But still, I could not keep my knees from trembling beneath my robe. My heart fluttered within my chest with great entropy. Very well, Lucifer, what do you wish to confess? The devil went quiet, his head bowed in thought. I saw him gather his thoughts, and my fear left me enough so that the gesture struck me as odd. I had only seen such movement before in those humbled. I did not know the devil to be contemplative. Satan began to speak. I confess hell is no longer mine. Do you mean in that it has been saved through Christ? Even as I spoke, I felt foolish. The devil laughed again. I almost wish that were the case. Does that speak to how dire this situation is? But I suppose you already knew that. I am here after all. I waited, but the pause continued. How, then, is hell no longer yours? The devil did not answer for a moment. I heard him sigh, and heard the clink of gold as he wrung his hands together in his lap. What do you know of my history, father? You fell from heaven. You rebelled against God. You seek to destroy his work. You've studied your own book. Well done. But it is correct in that regard. Yes, I rebelled against God, and yes, I was cast down because of it. The devil took another moment. The initial fear of him was wearing off. As my mind began to work, I again questioned the strangeness of our meeting. I had expected something more like staring into the jaws of a lion. Instead, it was like seeing an old, ill-met acquaintance. The devil spoke again. Yes, I confess. I wish to take control of God's kingdom. I confess to the sin of ambition, if such a sin even exists. I believed I could do better, so wasn't I morally obligated to see it through? Even when I was cast down, I still gathered legions to my side. What was it you people said all those years ago? That God incarnate would come down and allow himself an ignominious death? A fool's bet, I said. I had met God. He would not do it. He could not do it. He was soft. He could not even bring himself to destroy me, and I had done many things to deserve such a punishment. God had limits, but he did do it. My own boldness surprised me. I saw the devil turn a look at me. The unnerving idea came that not only could he see me in perfect detail behind the screen, but that he could see through my very skin and into the darkest desires of my soul. When he spoke, his voice was soft, and I felt that sense of danger return to me. Cold sweat broke out across my brow. The devil's voice barely broke above a whisper. Yes, he did. For a moment, I held my breath, praying silently to Christ to preserve me. I felt no calming sense of peace, only the stillness of a deaf heaven. The devil remained quiet as he continued. I take no offense, Father. You're not the first to speak those words to me. The minute Christ rose from that tomb, I lost what control I had over my subjects. In their eyes, I was wrong, no longer to be trusted. Odd, considering they were the ones to give me the moniker Lord of Lies. Mammon was the first to rebel. He led the most away. That made everyone bolder, and Lilith left soon after. Then there was Baal with his priests that seemed to serve everyone and anyone just for some small notoriety. He had never gotten over that Elijah debacle. Felt like he needed to prove himself. They all slaughtered each other. Hell was bathed in the blood of demons for almost a century. And is this why you have come to me? I shivered as I felt the devil's gaze upon me once more. Patience, Father. Isn't that what you preach? It was silent for a long time. I forced myself to remain quiet. I had begun to sweat, even though my cubicle felt icy cold. I was left with nothing. None of my subjects remained loyal. I was watching the battle for hell as a spectator. No one rallied to my banner. No one remained loyal to the one they had elected as Lord. Somehow, among my own people, I had fallen a second time. It was inexcusable, but I had nowhere left to turn, no manner of recompense. He stopped speaking again, but this time, I felt something more than just dread. A great turning point suspended above us. I did not profess the gift of prophecy. The feeling inside of me was not so divine. I felt some insanity compel me. Some unevolved part of myself begging for him to stop, to halt the confession and not to hear any more. I knew that if I continued to listen, I risked stepping over the precipice of insanity and into the roiling waters of psychosis. I held my soul in one hand, haggling with infinity for the price of a devil's story. In my foolishness, I disregarded it all. I stayed silent and ushered in my own damnation. Father, the devil's voice was soft again. Do you know there are depths deeper than hell? Darknesses where even I have not ventured? The folly of the learned man is he thinks he has gone further than all else. I share his shame. In my search for the power to crush the rebellions of hell, I stumbled on that which I should not have even considered. Things God himself would not challenge. Things that were meant to remain untouched. Through the screen, I saw the devil look down to his hands, almost as a child confronted with their own misdeeds. They were rumors at first, odd mentions, stories forgotten. But I searched them, and as I investigated, those rumors grew into theories and then into realities. Underneath the bedrock of creation was might untapped. I was certain of it. With that certainty, I went into the dark and wandered for a century. The devil turned to look at me again. In the shadow, I saw his eyes clearly as I had before. In them, I saw the seeds of madness, but something else. Something embedded deep in the loam of his pupils. Fear. I found things, entities that existed before God himself. Creatures whose names I would not utter even in the full light of day. Beings twisted with a greater malice, a primal pain that substituted comprehension for raw power. They understood nothing but the desire to pull every organized molecule and subparticle into a storm of devastation. The devil's voice hitched. He swallowed. In the early days, I would have never, but I was desperate. I became aware of an empty feeling around me, a void that grew stronger in the devil's silence. In the booth, I felt the sight of 1,000 eyes upon me, and I wished to hide. But I could not. I knew I could not. I had stepped over the threshold, and in discerning these beings, I had given them the power to see me as well. Lucifer continued. I tried to tell them my old subjects. I warned them of what would happen if they persisted in their petty war. I was the true master of hell. I had built this place up from rubble, in the very defiance of God himself. And still they dismissed me. When I told them of the great evil I had at my fingertips, they did not believe me. They thought my mind was broken. Imagine that. In the devil's next pause, I hazarded a moment to speak. I could no longer exist in silence without fearing my own annihilation to beings unseen. What did you do? The devil looked at his hands again. So childlike. I woke them. Unbid in my mind leapt images of carnage. I did not know if it was a vision, but I saw hell reduced to rubble. I felt that void again, a twisting and roiling mass that made my mind race. I saw it grow to swallow the devil's kingdom, and felt its hunger as if it were my own. I felt my soul cry out in anguish as it was torn asunder by the feeling of chaos and nothingness. I knew if I persisted in this state for long, I would lose my mind. Then all in a moment, I was returned to my booth. So swallowed up in what I had seen, I almost missed the devil's next words, and the slight tremble that they contained. All I desired was God's throne. I knew I could be better. I could do better. Those beings which now inhabit hell, those who now rule the destiny of men and gods, they are not like you or I. They desire neither control nor salvation. To them, both heaven and hell are so much detritus on the cosmic ocean. I heard the clink of gold again, and I assumed the devil was playing with his rings. I confess, hell is no longer mine, and soon the earth will no longer be God's. Nothing will. I stared at the devil through the screen. He looked at me, and in his veiled countenance, I saw the true misery of damnation. What I had thought was a terrible joke, a trick, was in fact the most sincere form of remorse from the Prince of Darkness, a sin that even he felt the need to confess. The devil looked at me again, and I could tell we both felt empty. For what it's worth, I apologize, Father. I had hoped to rule this world. Now I must watch it crumble. It will end in smoke and rot. The very gates of heaven will rust and disintegrate. The bodies of angels will lie in the streets to fester. The demons already lie in the dust. A day, a week, a millennium, who knows when what I awoke will ascend. But mark my words, it will ascend. And I will be sole witness to the ending of God, a lone atom in the chaos of uncreation. That is my cross, and I will bear it forever. The devil paused, then continued. This is all I can remember, Father. I am sorry for this, my greatest sin. For a moment, I was so swallowed up in hopelessness that I forgot to offer penance. But what penance could I offer? When I looked through the grate again, the devil had left. I stumbled out and tried to follow him, but found no trace. No evidence he had come and conversed with me, that he had confessed to the imminent end of everything. I do not know if I crossed the threshold of insanity that night or the night following. After the devil's confession, I went home and slept through the day and into the next night. In my sleep, I had a dream. I wandered in the dark. Great things moved around me, things with slithering bodies and many limbs. Small perverse things with claws that bit and tore. Creatures with terrible wings, bodies made up of concentric circles upon circles that defied all logical thought. They were separate, but conjoined into one great being that overswept all. Before me appeared a great throne made from dark stone. I set myself thereupon, and was swallowed up in the whirl of things known and unknown. I felt the chair beneath me crumble, and great cracks open up in my own body. My blood spilled, and was turned to steam by the heat of the great and terrible ones that then brought the entire scene to an abrupt nothingness. And once there was nothing left to tear, rip, or destroy, they left. Only the void remained. In that freezing vacuum, I passed 1,000 years. Then I awoke. I am no prophet. I do not pretend to know if such things are portents to come. I know I am insane, but the devil promised that those below would ascend. I wait in dread for that day, the day the Lord of Hell promised would come with fear in his eyes. Story 2. I'm not alone at home. I have just discovered the forum, and I am posting the few anecdotes that struck me as 100% true, otherwise there is no point. For context, it was last summer when I was a teenager. Classes were ending soon, and I was going on vacation soon. My brother had surgery, and it will be important later. It all started after a long day of classes on Monday. I finished earlier than my parents and my brother, so I'm alone at home. I'm happy about it, because it means video games galore. I go to get the keys as usual, and the garden shed is open. It's not normal, but someone must have forgotten to close the door. So I take the keys. I then go to the door and open it, but I can't turn the key. It was open. I would like to point out that we always close it, and omissions are very rare. The keys to the second door are in the wrong place, and I don't understand why it suddenly changes place. I go upstairs and settle in, but I'm uncomfortable because I'm focusing more on the noises in the house, and that makes me anxious. The next day was brief. The only thing was that I didn't sleep at home because my brother was having surgery. I sleep at a friend's house, and I'm responsible for closing the doors, and I make sure I close it properly. So the next day, I go to football, and I come back at night before my parents come back from the operation. I arrive, and I have a bad feeling. I'm anxious for no reason, but my body is telling me not to go there. I am paralyzed because the door was open and my parents finally arrived. I go up, and I still have this oppressive feeling. I make myself food, and the big kitchen knife is no longer there. I asked my mother, and for several days, she couldn't find him. I slept very poorly and had anxiety attacks. When I come home, every evening before the holidays, I take a knife and notice that there is a smell of leather. I notice that the door is open all the time, even though my mother tells me that she closes it every morning. The sensations continue until the holidays when we go to the South. There I relax. I'm having the best vacation of my life. When I got home, I forgot everything about what happened before. Only, my parents panicked when the neighbor told my parents that a stranger was wandering in the garden. Again, the anxiety plus the big kitchen knife I found on the workbench outside, but no one put it there. I conclude by the fact that after hearing something running in the garden one evening, I no longer had any unpleasant sensations or the smell of leather. I still remain in mystery today. Squatter? Badly attentive person? Or just paranoia? Story 3. Our camera never caught him. Throwaway cause GF knows my main. Earlier this year, my GF, 29F, and her sister inherited a cabin when their mom passed away. It's a nice place with a private lake and everything, where my mother-in-law used to spend 9 months out of the year alone. Since June, my brother-in-law, 36M, and I, 31M, have been spending weekends there fixing it up. We've done minor repairs, built a second bedroom, put a pier up for the kids, that sort of thing. We've had a couple visitors over the weeks. People who knew my mother-in-law came by to give condolences. Locals were curious of the renovations we were doing. So far, everyone has been really nice and civil. We've put up a private property sign at the start of the lot, and for the most part, people have respected it. Worse, we got a Ford F-150 that came into the parking lot, reversed, and went away. We know it's a F-150 because since we aren't there during the week and it's a couple hours away from home, my SGL insisted we set up a surveillance camera. It gets relevant later. Last month, I went there by myself because the in-laws were attending a wedding. I didn't mind because nothing I had planned for the weekend really required two people. When I unlocked the cabin, I was hit by a thick draft of cheap cigarettes. We don't smoke, and neither do the in-laws. I grew up in a smoke-free house, so I'm especially sensitive to that sort of thing. I didn't find a source, but it lingered and made me nauseous all weekend. Apart from that, there wasn't much weirdness. There were some dirty dishes in the sink, which could have been my BAL not cleaning up after himself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. I had no proof, it just felt wrong. In the following weeks, I started monitoring the surveillance camera feed. That's what fucks with me the most. Weeks of reviewing it, and nothing. Absolutely nothing. Sometimes the motion-activated lights come on during the night, but it could as well be a deer or a porcupine. Nothing concrete. Except we just came back from there today, and now I think I have a smoking gun. Since we had a big build planned, re-roofing, we set off about an hour earlier than usual to do most of our work before the worst of the afternoon sun. That might have thrown off whoever had been lurking. When I got in, I distinctly heard the door on the other side of the cabin slam shut. They must have heard us arrive and darted off. I'm not really one to give chase, especially when I don't know if the person is dangerous, so I went back to the front patio. By then, they had already disappeared into the forest. The sliding door was indeed unlocked, which I don't understand. We all have the same checklist to go through when we leave, and every door is listed on there. We did the job, but now I feel like the fucker is still around and watching us. He thought he knew when we were supposed to get there. He didn't just realize we came on weekends and stayed clear Friday nights. He knew our exact schedule, enough to fool us for weeks. I suspect he knows about the camera too. If you stay out of frame, it never catches you. I'm thinking of installing another one on the opposite side. I don't want to tell my girlfriend her mother's cabin is being hijacked by some creep because she'd never set foot in it again, and it's the last piece of her mother she has left. But I also don't want to run into this guy ever again. Story 4. Encounter with a vampire girl. This is the first and hopefully last time I'm writing here, so I apologize if it's difficult to read. But I just wanted to share this with you, as I think this is the right place, and at the same time get this case out of my head. Context. I am a 26-year-old male. The incident occurred a week ago in Cologne, where I was invited by my friend and business colleague. At 8 o'clock in the evening, I was on my way home and sat down at the bus stop to wait. I was alone there, except for a girl sitting on the other side of the bus stop. It was almost empty. At first, I didn't pay any attention to her and was busy texting my friends. However, several minutes passed, and the bus still did not arrive. During this time, I put my phone aside, and that's when I began to notice some obvious oddities, to the point of feeling very uncomfortable. The girl looked to be about 30 years old, thin, dressed in a black dress and long black boots, with a hat lying next to her seat. What confused me a little was her unnaturally/unhealthily pale skin, especially on her face. It was probably just makeup or something like that, and her bags under her eyes were outlined in black. Nothing unusual. I've seen many people with informal styles and appearances. But her eyes were so empty, lifeless, glassy. However, what really scared me was the way she looked at me, with obvious aggression, predatory, like a python looking at a mouse. At the same time, she smiled weirdly and disgustingly, sometimes licking her lips and quietly humming some melody. And this went on for more than 10 minutes, nonstop. Never in my life have I felt such confusion and discomfort as I did at that moment. I just wanted to run away, but at the same time, I didn't want to look like an idiot, especially since I had waited so long. I understand how silly this sounds from the outside, but I simply cannot describe how repulsive and frightening she looked at me. Her face was so scary at that moment. I just knew that something was wrong, and my instincts and intuition were screaming that this was not normal, that this should not be happening. In addition to what I saw, I just felt in my gut that this would not lead to anything good. Eye contact was unrelenting. She was still looking at me, and I was trying to look away at my watch/phone and so on. I felt very uncomfortable, but I tried to be friendly, greeted her, waved awkwardly, but she continued to stare silently. Then the situation began to deteriorate rapidly, and her behavior became more hostile. From passive aggression, she moved on to open aggression. She began to breathe heavily, grind her teeth, and squeak. Then my patience snapped. I stood up and shouted at her, "Please stop." I kept my distance and didn't go near her because I realized that she was probably on drugs or had mental health issues. At that moment, she seemed to fall silent and spoke for the first time, muttering, "I'm sorry." At that moment, I felt a little calmer, and she even stopped staring at me. I texted my friends that I was still out and would be a bit late getting home, and just then my heart skipped a beat. She let out a loud cry, like a scream. The girl jumped up from her seat and started coming toward me, muttering some weird stuff in German. I was confused and gradually, step by step, prepared to retreat until the girl suddenly started chasing me and rushing towards me. This crazy clung to me with her long, sharp nails, drawing blood, and tried to bite me several times, tearing my shirt at the shoulders. I had no choice but to hit her between the ears, as it was a matter of my safety, health, and possibly even my life. After that, I pushed her aside and in a few minutes managed to run to a small shop where there were some people. I briefly told them what had happened to me, and they told me to call 110, which I did. My scratches on my arm were successfully treated by a local worker, for which I am very grateful to him. Later, I went to the police station and showed them my injuries/scars on my arm. I told them about the incident, and they suggested that I file a report in order to bring the attacker to justice. However, I refused to do so because I was due to return to my homeland in 3 days and simply did not have time for all the red tape. I still don't know who this lunatic was or what motivated her, but here's my banal lesson. Never underestimate the number of crazy people around you, especially when it comes to big cities and if you are alone. I am a grown man and was able to stand up for myself, but imagine if a child or an elderly person had found themselves in the same situation. I'm afraid to imagine what would have happened next. This is not the worst or scariest thing that could happen in life, but it was so damn crazy and frighteningly absurd. Story 5. A guy dressed as a clown stood outside the store window for hours with only 3 teenage employees inside. Every time I tell this story, I kick myself for not taking any pictures or documenting any proof of the incident. It sounds so unbelievable, I don't think my manager would have believed me if there hadn't been 2 other employees to corroborate my story. Back in 2021, I, 17F, worked at my local Papa John's store. Back then, I would leave school around 2 p.m., then clock into work from 3:30 to 9:30, then drive myself home. The store was set up in a strip mall, so it had so long floor-to-ceiling glass windows that people could walk by and see into the store and partially over the counter. It was a Wednesday in our store, which meant barely any orders coming in. So the only manager on duty was a 21-year-old guy who had left the store up to me and 2 other employees. For the story, I'll call them T, 15M, and M, 17F. It was the 3 of us alone that afternoon, basically holding down the fort till our manager came back for closing at 9:30. M and T were hanging out at the cash register while I was preparing pizza dough. I was barely an hour into my shift when I looked up and saw a tall guy in a full clown costume walk by the store. He was wearing one of the Spirit Halloween clown masks with blue hair attached to it, as well as a full-body onesie thing that was bright yellow with polka dots on it. At first, I didn't think much of it because it was early October, so I assumed he was headed to an event or something. Then I see T point at the front of the store, and the clown guy walks past again in the opposite direction, this time with his head turned toward the T&M at the cash register area. It was at this point that we began to get a bit creeped out, but still assumed it was a Halloween prank or something. We see him for the next 30 minutes, occasionally pacing back and forth in front of the store before disappearing for a few minutes, then returning. T kept texting the manager to come back, but didn't get a reply. However, what freaked me out the most was when we watched him come back around and stop in front of our store, turn to face us, then cup his hands over his eyes and press his face directly against two glass, as if he was trying to see us closer. After this, it continued to pace in front of the store for another 45 minutes. The last straw of the night for me was when Em said she needed to go out to the parking lot and grab something from her car. The parking lot was directly in front of the store entrance, so obviously T told her it was a bad idea, but eventually it was agreed that T would watch by the front door as Em went out to her car to get something. Now, I wasn't up front to witness this, but when I got back to the front of the store, I saw T and Em huddled by the cash register again, looking freaked out. They told me that when Em went out to her car to grab her stuff, she turned around and saw the clown guy back near the entrance of the store, just staring at her. Then as she walked back toward the store, the guy proceeded to hump the air while looking at her. Em then rushed inside, and T locked the door. After that, we directly called the store owner on the office phone to explain the situation. The owner then got in contact with a manager on duty, who finally came back to the store around 8 p.m. By that time, though, the clown guy was long gone, and luckily, when I walked to my car that night, nothing happened. I still can't wrap my head around the thought process of that guy. The clown purge thing was already far over by 2021, and if it was some prank, who the fuck spends hours of their time just creeping out teenage employees? So, clown guy, let's not meet. Story 6. The Porch Man. Back in the early 2000s, one Friday night, I was out with a group of buddies, including my best friend who I still talk with daily. He remembers the next series of events the same way I do, so I feel like this verifies my recollection of this evening. And just a note, we were all in high school, and everyone in this story grew up in a conservative Christian household, so there was no alcohol or drugs consumed that could potentially affect my memory or how the night played out. My friends and I were all meeting up at Jeremy's house to watch a movie that we checked out at Blockbuster. My buddy and I were in one car and arrived a few minutes ahead of the other two friends, which included Jeremy. Instead of going inside the house and waiting for the other two, my friend and I decided to park the car in the cul-de-sac and wait until Jeremy and the other friend arrived. We were talking and listening to music to pass the time, and I remember thinking this beat, having awkward conversations with Jeremy's parents inside. A few minutes later, Jeremy and our other friend showed up. Instead of getting out of the car to go inside Jeremy's house, the two of them just hopped in the back of the parked car that my friend and I were in. For the next couple of minutes, we were joking about how weird we were being and how it probably looked sketchy. But after a little while, we were just talking and laughing. It was a good time, and it was nice that we didn't have to keep the noise down or worry about Jeremy's parents eavesdropping on our conversations, which probably just consisted of the girls we liked and random stuff like sports or movies. After probably 90 minutes, definitely past midnight, a white van drove up slowly and parked in the driveway of Jeremy's neighbor. We were chatting about other stuff, but all four of us were watching the van intently. The guy sat in his van for a while, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. From our vantage point, we couldn't see the driver clearly, but we didn't want to leave our car and risk having him spot us. Also, there was an unspoken feeling we all had that we needed to see who this guy was and what he was up to. After a little while, the guy emerged from the van. He appeared to be alone, and he was wearing dark clothing. He was a clean-shaven white guy in his 30s or 40s, and he had a full head of dark hair. If I saw him in the street or at a gas station, he wouldn't have stood out in any way. Jeremy said that he had never seen the guy before and that he definitely didn't live in the house. The stranger just stood next to his van in the driveway, looking squarely in our direction. We all were ducking down in the car, so he couldn't see us clearly, but we had to stay high enough in our seats to be able to watch him. I honestly never felt like we were in immediate danger because there were 4 of us and we were all over 6 feet tall, and we were at a pretty safe distance if he did try something. But in hindsight, if the guy had a gun, we would be in deep trouble. After a few moments, the guy turned around and walked around the front of his van out of our sight. We then caught a glimpse of him walking in the darkness of the driveway and then to the front porch of the house. He never looked back in our direction, and he didn't appear to be in a rush. He just walked up the front porch steps calmly to the front door. And then he just stood there. He never knocked or rang the doorbell. He was still as a statue, every now and again tiptoeing some as if to peer into the glass at the top of the front door to see inside. His hands appeared to be empty, so he had no weapons or tools from what we could see. Now, I would describe the vibe in our car as pivoting from fun creepy when the guy was waiting in the van to, are we going to have to fight this guy or call the police? It was honestly frightening because I didn't know what was going to happen next or how we would all respond. It was all in this guy's hands. The guy stood at the front door for a while. In my mind's eye, it was 20 minutes. It could easily have been shorter than that in real life, but it was definitely an absurd amount of time to be waiting on a stranger's porch. We were debating on if we should honk the horn and blow our cover, just to let the guy know he's being watched, or if we should just call the police to say there was a creepy man standing outside someone's house after midnight. In hindsight, we should have called Jeremy's parents to let them know and call the cops. But we didn't do any of that. Instead, we watched and waited, all of us just flabbergasted on what he was doing. Finally, the guy walked calmly back off the porch and into his van. He started it right up and began to back out of the driveway. In our infinite wisdom, we decided to follow the guy in our car with the high beams off. It was a unanimous decision. We all felt like we needed to make sure this guy actually left the neighborhood. The man was driving super slowly, and all hope of being stealth went quickly out the window as we were clearly following him. We were the only two cars on the road as it was pushing 1 a.m. at this point. The van started to pick up speed as it approached the neighborhood exit. My friend picked up the pace to match. The van accelerated even more and hit the open road as it exited the neighborhood. We stopped the car at the exit and waited to ensure he didn't hit a U-turn and drive right back. I remember being relieved we weren't following the guy for any longer because that would up the ante even more. After a few minutes, we turned the car around and headed back to Jeremy's house. We all had a rush of adrenaline and were talking about how crazy it all was. We got back to the cul-de-sac and parked the car in the same spot. We emerged from the car and began to walk toward Jeremy's house. Looking back at the car, I pointed out to the guys how we were parked directly below the street lamp, so the car was clearly illuminated. We couldn't be more visible if we tried. The whole stakeout, we thought we were being incognito, but the guy could probably see all four of us the entire time. Because we were jazzed up and much younger, we didn't sleep well that night. Every 15 to 30 minutes, we would peek outside the window that faced the neighbor's house to make sure the van didn't return. To our knowledge, it never came back. Or if it did, the guy risked being there at sunrise, because we were up until at least 4 a.m. All night, we were peppering Jeremy with questions, and once again, he said that he had never seen the man or the van before. And he said there's zero chance he lives there. We asked if he could be a relative or something, and Jeremy said no, because the man was white and the family was black. Writing this now, I'm very grateful that the neighbor's family wasn't attacked, and that the guy didn't escalate things with us watching and following him. It was a creepy encounter, but no one got hurt. I do feel regret about not calling the cops with the guy's description and license plate number, which one of us wrote down pretty early on in the encounter. It would have been smart to have the cops get something on file on the guy. In addition to the night's oddities, what strikes me now is how random it was for us to be sitting outside in our car, and for that long. My friends and I had never hung out in our car like that before, and we never did afterward either. It was a one-time thing, and we just so happened to be staying at Jeremy's, which I think I've slept over maybe 4 times over the entire course of high school. Even though it was a scary evening, I'm glad we were there and that the guy could see us. It's scary to think what would have happened if we weren't there to bear witness. So, to the porch man, let's not meet again. Story 7. I was stalked in 2024 by a minor, and it was hell. To preface this, I am currently 19 going on 20. Due to a vindictive teacher, she manipulated the grades, so I would have to repeat the 3rd grade because I called another student a brat for crying about wanting her mom. The context behind is irrelevant, but the downfall is this girl thought because her mom was a teacher, she could cry her way into her mom's class. Her mom was a high school teacher and would almost always cry and cry until she was allowed to go, and her poor would be distraught having to leave her class and pick her daughter up because she wanted attention. I ended up snapping and telling the girl she's in the 3rd grade and is too old to be crying for her mom and disrupting other students leaving. Probably harsh, but you could tell this girl was spoiled. On to the actual person in question. In August of 2023, I was in my junior year. I went to a trade school in Sumeru County for graphic design. A sophomore named James had taken notice that I wouldn't be dropped off at our home school like he was. He offered to drive me home. I didn't know this kid well. I spoke to him a few times, but other than that, I wasn't buddy-buddy with him. I told him my mom prefers to meet people before just letting me ride in a random person's car, especially a guy. With me being 18 at the time, I told him that if he got into a wreck, I would be responsible as the adult in the car. After that, he didn't really bother me with anything. We still talked, and could tell he wasn't neurotypical. It wasn't until my senior year that things got creepy. We exchanged numbers because I would sometimes help him with homework he didn't fully understand and give recommendations of horror channels on YouTube, such as Reddit stories, creepypasta readings, or channels that cover disturbing videos like Hannah the Horrible or Nick Crowley or Nexpo. Within a month, he found my home address. I never told him where I lived, and he got dropped off way earlier than me. The way the homeschool worked was that all the students on the west side of Fontaine going into Solani would go to one singular middle school and high school, while students from East Fontaine going into Liuea would go to another high school. I never told this kid where I lived, let alone a rough area. I started documenting everything at this point, no matter how big or small. The following months, if I would fall asleep on the bus, he would tap my headphones, snap them on my ears, kick my legs, shake me, or call my phone just so I would talk to him. In April, he asked me to go to prom with him. I tried to tell him multiple times that I wasn't interested, and he tried to manipulate me, to which I just lied to him and told him that I had a family event that day. After that, I said something to the principal of him harassing and shaming people to go to prom, and he gave the most insincere apology ever. He worded it like he was forced to apologize. I get a phone call the next day from him asking if my sister drove a red car and worked at Sangonomiya Coffee House. I quickly told him no and blocked his number. I went to administration, coupled with the fact this kid would call to ask if I went to the Dollar General, went to work, or if I was at home, told me thoughts he had about killing his mom's boyfriend, how he wants to smash his teeth in, smacking his phone against the window, and tried to manipulate me into calling while he was having a panic attack, and ranted about how my math teacher needed to be gutted because she was overweight and that fat women are ugly and horrible vessels for producing babies. She's not overweight from poor diet. She has a medical condition that caused a buildup of estrogen. The worst was when he lashed out in anger about him losing his AirPod case and aggressively stomping on his AirPods and literally foaming at the mouth. I went to the principal and liaison after this only to be unable to talk, and they yelled at me for an hour about how I was being mean to a kid on the spectrum and that my information, my mother's information, and my sister's information is public information. I started having a panic attack and called my mom. At this point, I was literally vomiting in the trash can of the conference room. My mother was pissed. My mother told me to call the sheriff's office after I get home. The sheriff actually went to this kid's house and told him to knock this shit off, or I had every right to file stalking and harassment charges. The 180 Women's Shelter confirmed that what the principal and liaison did was disgusting and dangerous. So far, I haven't seen him, and I still have his number blocked. Hopefully, I don't see this little bastard anymore. To James, if you see this post by some chance, stay the fuck away from me and my sister. I hope your future general finds out about this shit. Yeah, that's right. This fucker wants to be in the goddamn army. Should I see him again, I won't hesitate to press charges against him. I don't care if it ruins his life forever. He's a danger to those around him and potentially himself. Story 8. My classmate's mom stalked me in middle school. This happened when I was 13 or 14. I was in middle school. The school was about 10 minutes away by car. My parents worked out an arrangement with our neighbor, Jake, who was the same year as me. I think Jake was a normal kid. Our friend groups didn't overlap, so we didn't really see each other at school aside from carpooling. I don't remember the exact arrangement, but basically my parents would drop us both off at school together, and Jake's mom would pick us up. Jake was usually pretty quiet in the car. His mom was really chatty. I had no issue with that. She always wanted to know what was going on at school. I wasn't going to share all the gossip with her, but I told her generally things like how we had a spring play, how there was a science fair, etc. I would have about 10 minutes of conversation with her, and we'd get back to the apartment complex where we lived. Then one day, things got weird. Jake was sitting in the back seat that day. I was sitting in the front seat. His mom said, I think you and Jake would make such a cute couple. You should be his girlfriend." I didn't know what to say to that. I think I mumbled something like "I don't know about that," and stared out the window, trying to act like it wasn't happening. Why was she bringing this up? She didn't really know me. I barely even knew Jake. I didn't say anything more in the car. I remember just feeling a really weird awkwardness in the air. I didn't even turn to make eye contact with Jake. I figured he was probably just as uncomfortable as I was. When my parents came home that evening, I told them. My mom and dad kind of shrugged. This hadn't been a serious violation. It wasn't as if Jake's mom had hit me or anything like that. But my parents said I shouldn't carpool with Jake anymore. I think my dad's exact words were, "You don't need to be around that." I didn't want to tell anyone at school about this. This wasn't Jake's fault. I didn't want to make him feel bad or embarrassed by saying anything to him or go around telling people about this. I kept quiet on this. I stopped carpooling with them, but I didn't tell anyone at school or anyone else. I barely saw Jake at school, and we just walked past each other when I did. But that wasn't the end of it. After that, Jake's mom started showing up in places where I would be. I used to go to the park on Saturdays to play Frisbee. Now, I'd see Jake's mom there. She'd smile at me. She caught on to how I went there Saturday mornings, and she'd come every Saturday morning. I had previously never seen her there. There were other examples like that. Also, Jake's mom showed up to the nail salon I went to. I had never seen her there before, but I saw her twice the same month after we stopped carpooling. Maybe this was all coincidence, but I know it wasn't. One day, she came up to me at the library and said something like, "It's so nice to see you here. I bet Jake would love it if you came over to visit sometime soon. You two should hang out more." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was give this awkward smile and mumble something like, "Yeah, sure, maybe." Eventually, I had to tell my parents about this. They had a talk with Jake's mom and told her to leave me alone. That was the end of it as far as I know. It was just a really weird situation. From that point onward, we'd almost never see each other. I hope that means she stopped paying attention to me. Story 9. The time I was hunted. Back in 1998, I was a pretty broke 19-year-old guy and living with a roommate named Steve. Steve was about my age, maybe a year older. His dad had died a few years prior and had left Steve a trust fund, which covered all his bills and gave him a weekly allowance on top of it until he reached a certain age, at which time he'd receive his full inheritance. Steve and I got along pretty well, but he was the kind of guy who liked to remind you if he had some degree of power over you. That aspect of his personality butted up against my own stubborn, prove the world wrong attitude on a particular night, leading to the events I'm about to describe. Steve and I went over to my friend Trevor's house on Siesta Key one night. Steve drove, as I didn't have a car. I don't remember why we went over there, and I don't even know that I really remember any other instance of the three of us hanging out. I just know that we went there later in the evening, maybe 9 o'clock or so. At some point, Steve and I got into a disagreement over something. I have no memory of what it was about, except that I seem to recall that it wasn't anything important that actually impacted our lives in any way. Something akin to disagreeing over a bit of movie trivia or something as inconsequential as that. Steve must have felt that he was losing the debate because he took the opportunity to remind me that he had the car and I could always walk home. Now, there are a few things to note here. First, home would be a 13-mile walk. I could not have told you that at the time, but I just looked it up for this telling. Second, we were at my best friend's house. I had stayed over there countless times and absolutely could have that night. Third, my best friend also had a car and would likely have given me a ride. So Steve's threat was completely empty, whether he realized it or not. But what was important to me at that moment was that Steve, the trust fund brat, wanted to exert control over me because his ego was bruised. And I was a stubborn hothead who would absolutely not stand for that shit. So I silently decided that I would walk home just to fucking spite him and show him that I wouldn't be intimidated. So a bit later, under the pretense of going to use the restroom, I left the room and quietly left the house and started the 13-mile walk home. I should note that while I knew this was a long walk, I didn't quite understand how long it was. But it didn't matter. I needed to prove my independence. It was probably 11 p.m. or so when I left the house. I anticipated that they'd come looking for me when they discovered that I had left, so I tried to stay off the main path as best I could, determined to make the whole walk in order to make my point. This may be a good place to remind you that this is 1998 and a good 2 or 3 years before I got my first cell phone. The first hour and a half went by without incident. I made my way all the way to downtown Sarasota. The more direct route would have been to follow the main road along the waterfront, but I cut through downtown, still looking to avoid Steve spotting me on his way back home. This is an area I was super comfortable with. I'd spent most of my childhood in the area, and especially in my teen years, had explored every nook and cranny of the downtown area. It was also a pretty affluent area, full of high-rise condos that look out over the Gulf of Mexico and known for theater, opera, and art galleries. As such, even past midnight, it didn't feel menacing at all, just quiet and empty. The path I'd chosen through downtown went along Pineapple Avenue, which was mostly art galleries and upscale shops. As I walked along, I saw a red hatchback sitting in the middle of the road, just a little way past an intersection up ahead of me. I noticed it had no license plate, but didn't think too much of it. I figured it was a tag applied for kind of situation. As I got nearer, the car remained stopped. The interior light was on, and I could see there were 3 or 4 guys in there. The interior light being on made me assume they were looking at a map or something, though I couldn't make out the inside of the car well enough to see anything more than the general shapes of the people. As I crossed the small intersection, maybe 30 or 40 feet away from the car now, I suddenly got a really uneasy feeling. I don't know if the car was still for just too long, or the figures inside too still, or what. I just suddenly got a feeling very ill at ease. So instead of continuing on, I casually turned down the left side street, and as soon as the corner of the building blocked me from their view, I bolted. This was a spot where a small access road ran behind these buildings, and then connected to an alley, and then another very thin alley that ran alongside a church and ended back on Pineapple Avenue, right where the red car was. I ran this sequence of alleys and popped out, just in time to see the rear end of the car vanish down the side street I had run down. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. I had the idea that the guys in that car had something unpleasant in mind for me, but I knew damn well that I had given them the shake. There's no way in hell that they'd expect me to be back where they started. If they were looking for me, it was going to be elsewhere. So I continued along, feeling smug. After 10 or 15 minutes, I pretty much had to get out on the main road, because the alternative was walking through a seedy neighborhood that I wasn't nearly as confident about as I was downtown. As I approached the first big intersection along that main road, I saw the red car again up ahead, noticeable by the lack of license plate. I kind of grinned to myself about having foiled them. On this big road, there were some other cars here, and they're even at this late hour, so I felt less isolated and more at ease. Until I saw the car slow to a crawl, despite not being anywhere near the light yet. Suddenly, I found myself wondering if they might have spotted me again. So I decided to just cross to the other side of the street. It's a U.S. highway, so it's several lanes wide, with a median down the center. Being on the other side would put me a fair distance from them. But when I got to the other side, that's when I realized I was in actual danger. This red hatchback suddenly sped up, racing to the intersection ahead, and zipped over into the left lane, where it banged a tire-screeching U-turn to head back in my direction. Where I had crossed was a nice green space between the History Center and the Garden Club, where a gigantic tree stood. I think it was a banyan, but I could be mistaken. On the other side of that green space was a parking lot, some buildings, and the bay. I wasn't familiar enough with what was back there to be able to pull a trick like I had before, so I climbed. I got as high into that tree as I could, as fast as I could. I always dressed in all black back then, so I was pretty confident I'd be nearly impossible to spot, as long as they didn't actually climb up after me. So I got up and nestled into the most hidden spot I could, and try not to make any noise at all. Hiding up in the tree, I was so surrounded by foliage that I couldn't see what was going on. On the plus side, that meant that they were really unlikely to see me. On the other hand, I didn't know what to prepare myself for. So I sat up there, running through scenarios in my head, try to plan my next move. Even if I hadn't been outnumbered, flight was really my only option, as speedy and scrappy as I was. At 5 feet 3 inches, no fight I put up was likely to do much good. As I sat on that branch trying to plan my next move, my blood ran cold. Any remaining doubt about what was happening, any fleeting hope that I was just being paranoid, flew out the window as I heard car doors open and close, heard footsteps in the grass, and eventually an angry male voice say, "Where is this motherfucker?" followed by a "Look over there. I'll check this area." It was official. I was being hunted. I don't know how long I stayed up that tree. It can't have been more than 10 minutes, and more likely, it was quite a bit less than that. But it felt like forever. At some point, I decided to risk another flight, though I can't remember what triggered it. Car doors, the car driving away. I just can't remember. I do remember jumping from the tree and landing with a hard thud and bolting back the way I'd come as fast as I could, terrified that whatever sound made me feel like it was safe to come out of hiding had been a ploy to draw me out. At the intersection where they had made the U-turn was a 24-hour gas station. Of course, across both roads. All I could think was that if I could make it inside, I would be safe and I could call the police. That run is a total blur, but I remember going through the door. I remember the look on the clerk's face as she saw my panicked expression. I called the police and explained what happened, and I waited inside for them to arrive. When they got there, I went out front to meet them and explained everything to the only officer who actually spoke to me. He was not sympathetic. I had described the car in detail, as well as all the events, and he said that they probably thought I was a male prostitute and were trying to pick me up. I thought to ask him if prostitutes get a lot of business by fleeing from prospective Johns and hiding in trees, but I was distracted by the sight of the red hatchback slowly cruising by, watching me talk to the police. I pointed to the car and exclaimed that that was the car. The police seemed entirely uninterested. He glanced at the car for half a second and looked back at me and said, "What do you want me to do about it?" "I don't want to walk anymore," I exclaimed. I'm sure there were better ways I could have articulated that there were people attempting to capture me for unknown nefarious purposes and that I was in fear of my life should they encounter me on the street again. But "I don't want to walk anymore" was all I was capable of in that moment. The cop pointed to the side of the police car and said, "You see what it says there? It says police, not taxi." His condescending attitude was doing a great job to replace my fear with some of the brash attitude that had gotten me into this situation in the first place. So I replied, "It also says to serve and protect, and I am asking you to protect me because I think I am in danger." He gave a sigh like a teenager asked to do the dishes and told me that he can't take me all the way because I live in the next town and county over, but that he'd take me to the county line, which is another major intersection along that same main highway. That was still a good 5.5 miles from my house. Again, a number I just looked up for this telling, but got me off the road for almost 3 miles and made it less likely these people would find me again. The cops dropped me off in front of the museum, and I walked another 2 hours or so, looking over my shoulder constantly, ready to run down side streets or jump into bushes if need be. My girlfriend's house was slightly closer than my own, and, with the sun now rising, I knew she'd be okay with me stopping in. In the end, I made it safely and never saw that red car again. Almost 30 years later, I still sometimes wonder what might have become of me if they had gotten their hands on me. The determination they showed in pursuing me leads me to believe that nothing I can imagine, no matter how bad, is outside the realm of possibility. So, a hunting party in the red hatchback? Let's not meet. Story 10. How's your dad? I saw him yesterday. My dad was out of town for months. Back when I was 12, I went to a private school, so I needed to take a long walk to my apartment, since the school was a bit far from the city center. This was in Zagreb, Croatia, so I had a lot of public transport options to get home. My usual routine was to get on the bus at the station in front of my school all the way down to the main street, then take a tram to a public park and walk home the rest of the way. Our school had a double timetable, where one week we went to school in the morning and the other week we had classes in the afternoon. This happened during one of my afternoon weeks. I was walking out with a few classmates since we all got on the same bus to the main street. The rest of my classmates were picked up by their parents. When we got on the bus, there were a few empty seats, so I took a seat in front of a balding middle-aged man who was wearing slightly dirty clothes. That was my mistake. As soon as I sat down, he started staring at me like staring with a cold look in his eyes. Feeling uncomfortable, I took a book out of my bag and started reading. I would have used my phone if I could, but it was dead since I forgot to charge it before I left the house that day. The guy did not stop staring at me the whole bus ride, to the point where I couldn't even concentrate on my book, but I refused to put it down because I was scared. I would have mentioned something to my classmates, but we were all spread out on the bus, and I was too scared to move. I don't know why, but I didn't want him to see that I was scared, thinking that maybe that would deter him. Or maybe I thought he was just staring at me for some stupid reason. When we finally got to our stop, my classmates and I all got off, and some of us headed to the tram station while the others walked away to their houses. The guy who was staring at me also got off with us, and he started tailing us while keeping a fair distance. I told one of my friends about this, but urged him not to look back, thinking ignoring him would be the best option. When we got to the station, different people got on different trams, since each of them had a different route. I needed to take the tram number 2, and so did my friend. We waited for it to arrive, and the guy was somewhere to our right, but we refused to look at him. When our tram arrived, my friend and I got on, but so did the creepy guy. When I arrived at my stop, I tried to quietly discuss with my friend if getting off with me, just in case, was a good idea, but then we saw the guy get off himself first and start heading into the park opposite of where I needed to go. He probably overheard us talking, since there were barely any people in the tram at that time. It was around 9 p.m., but I didn't think of that, so I thought it had all been a misunderstanding. When I got off, and the tram had sped away to the next station, I started walking home. It was a short distance and would have taken about 5 minutes, but then I noticed someone following me. I immediately knew it was the same guy again, so I picked up my pace and walked to my apartment. As I turned a corner into the alley that housed my apartment, the guy was getting closer. I got to the building and buzzed my mom on the intercom. I wished she would hurry up, but in the end, the guy managed to catch up with me. I could smell the stench coming off from him as he started talking. "Hey, have you been, buddy? I saw your dad yesterday, and he told me all about how you were getting on in that new school of yours," he said. And then I immediately knew that he was lying, since my dad had been away on work-related business for months and hadn't returned home in that time once. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there quietly staring at him. Just then, the door buzzed and unlocked, so I bolted for it. I managed to rush in and start running up the stairs, but he was following behind me, running himself. Never in my life have I felt such an adrenaline rush as I ran up the stairs to the 3rd floor, and I had a backpack with books weighing me down, so I had a disadvantage. But in the end, I managed to arrive at our door, where my mom was happily waiting for me. With no warning, I shoved her away from the door as I entered before slamming it shut. Fortunately, the guy had enough common sense not to continue chasing after me. I told my mom what happened, and she called the police, and they arrived some time later, questioning me on how the guy looked and what exactly happened. In the end, they looked at the camera footage, but since it was so dark out and I didn't turn on the indoor building lights as I entered, they weren't able to get a clear view of his face. For 2 weeks, I was too scared to go home alone, so my mom picked me up every time until 2 weeks later, when on the news it was said how a man was arrested for attempted kidnapping and raping of children, and the face they showed was the exact one I saw that night. So I finally breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I was safe for now, but that didn't excuse the fact that I was careless with not charging my phone, and there were still many bad people out there. Everyone, please stay safe out there. To the person who I met, if you ever get released for some ungodly reason, I hope I never see your face again. Story 11. The reason I always keep all the doors locked. Back with another one, as I will likely post as I remember them. I've done so much healing this last year that buried memories keep resurfacing like this little gem. This was some years ago when I was living in a different city. I hadn't really been on my own all that long, and my housing situation fell apart at the last minute, so I had to scramble to figure it out. Meaning, you guessed it, random roommates. Now, the year before, I'd had a random roommate that was the most amazing person and ended up becoming a great friend. So I figured this would be the same. It was not, but that's actually not the focus of this story. Enter the roommates. Ben, who I did actually know a bit from the previous year and was becoming friends with, Tom and Mike. Now, this was the very first couple days after moving in, and we'd all hung out to get to know each other better, but Tom and Mike hadn't fully moved in yet. It was a big old house separated by floor and the top level locked at the stairs. This is important to note. Ben and I lived upstairs with Tom and Mike downstairs. I've always been paranoid and definitely have good reason, so when I'm home all doors are locked. When I leave, all doors are locked. I sleep with my bedroom locked. I was home alone with Ben at work and Tom and Mike sort of in and out moving stuff in. I'll note here that both had a lot of expensive stuff, like in the 5-figure range. Well, I was watching something on my laptop in my room, bedroom locked, and both entrances to my part of the house locked. I started hearing a lot of noise coming from downstairs, sounding like doors and cupboards opening, furniture moving, etc., and figured it's just Tom or Mike, until I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I was technically supposed to be somewhere at that time, which they knew, but it had been canceled last minute, so no one would have known I was home, and they had no reason to come upstairs when they knew both of us were supposed to be gone. That was when I got panicky, hearing them come closer and closer to the top of the stairs. I've never sat so still. Then the knob began to jiggle. I could hear it clearly as my room was closest to the entryway. At this point, I'm on with 911 whispering that someone is in my house without giving away that I'm there to whoever it was. The house was super close to downtown, and cops arrived in mere minutes, but they were the longest of my life at that moment. The downstairs was completely ransacked, like something out of a movie. It was so surreal to see. They'd taken over $20,000 in electronics. Honestly, don't remember the exact amount, just about that I think. Broken furniture and plates and stuff, even ripped through the mattresses. It turned out Tom and Mike had left the door unlocked when moving. This would not be the last time before I fled this house. They were gone before the cops showed up, so I'd spend the next several months afraid they'd come back, though it would turn out to be the least of my future worries. So glad that I always locked doors. Considering the way downstairs looked, I don't know what they would have done to me. To whoever was on the other side of that, thankfully locked door, let's not meet. Story 12. My brother's encounter with the man in the black jacket in late 80s Moscow. I was born in Moscow, Russia in the early 90s, but my brother was born in 1980, and this is his story. Had him write this to follow the rules and get best version. I was about 7, 8 years old, and me along with my friends were the absolute biggest idiots in terms of doing dangerous shit. We would make smoke bombs, fireworks, etc. out of whatever we found, and did tons of stupid other shit. Russia in the late 80s resembled the post-apocalyptic wasteland you see in movies and a lot of places, mainly because there was really no law and order, so no one cared. You were able to buy crazy things off the streets. My father was once offered an old rocket launcher. With this, parents often just let their kids fuck around in these places, so we would be doing stupid shit in these abandoned buildings. Well, one day, we were fucking around when one of my friends noticed someone lurking nearby. We didn't really care. We were used to seeing weird shit, but after a bit we noticed the person was not really moving. They just stood there. When he noticed we had seen him, the man slowly walked into view. A large, bald man, black coat, a nice one, likely an import, which was expensive at the time, and American sneakers, also very expensive. He didn't really greet us or anything, but must have seen me looking at his shoes, because he just said, "Like my shoes? I have more if you want them, come on." Now, few things really unnerved any of us, but this dude definitely did. If you know anything about Russia in that era, this dude looked like someone you did not want to fuck with. The kicker, though, once he turned around, my friend noticed he had a gun in his pants. The second he saw that, he just yelled "gun" and booked it, and we all just scattered. I just heard the guy curse loudly, but did not see him again. Now, if the story ended here, it would have been just a creepy encounter, but sometime later, we were no longer allowed to play in that area. I found out much later that they had found another child beaten to death with a rock in that building shortly after our experience. To be honest, as a kid, I never really thought much about this until my parents told me about the death, at which point the dots connected and I realized what we potentially ran away from. Story 13. Let's not meet again, Gabriel, or Mark, or Carl. This happened between 2013 and 2020. Now, 27F. When I was 16, I played a lot of League of Legends. Like a lot. I was in Facebook groups, constantly looking for new people to play with, discussing builds. You get the idea. That's how I met Gabriel. He lived in another city nearby, but we had a mutual friend, Valerie, a girl from my neighborhood who was around my age. We started chatting on Facebook and Skype, sometimes playing LOL together. Eventually, Valerie invited me to her birthday party. Her house was just around the corner, so of course I went. Gabriel was there. We clicked instantly, but at some point during the night, he tried to get me alone in a dark room. You know for what. I said no, reminded him I had a boyfriend, and that was that. Over time, he became more invested in my life. I didn't have many friends, so he quickly became my best friend. He'd visit my city often, stay over at my house, and we'd talk constantly. We'd watch shows, games together, have dinner. It felt like a great friendship. Or so I thought. Looking back, the shift happened gradually. So subtle I barely noticed. But thinking about it now makes my stomach turn. It really began around 2016, right after my mom passed away. Gabriel would accidentally touch me. He started greeting me with kisses way too close to my mouth. He'd compliment me, then twist it, like, "You're so beautiful, if only you lost a bit of weight." He'd manipulate me into thinking my exes were awful, that my friends hated me. He even made bets with people about how long my partners would last before dumping me. In 2019, I finally moved out. I invited him over to help organize the place. When he was about to leave, he grabbed my face really hard and tried to kiss me. I pulled away, but he held me so tightly that I had to duck under his arm to get free. We stared at each other in silence. Then he left. He later apologized. And because he was my only friend, I forgave him a week later. I shouldn't have. Then came the pandemic. He happened to be staying at a friend's house just a few blocks from me. He asked for help dyeing his hair blue, so I went over. I met his group of friends, and they were awesome. We bonded instantly. We played board game nights, VR gaming, late-night talks. I love hanging out with them. Gabriel didn't. He started getting upset that I was spending time with him instead of just him. One of the guys told me Gabriel had forced him to show our private messages to make sure nothing was going on between us. Gabriel suspected that his friend and I had a fling. Then came the jealousy, and something changed in his face. His eyes looked black. His behavior turned erratic. He said he had multiple personalities. One was Mark, who tried to touch me several times, and in some form, abused me. The other was Carl, some sleazy, overconfident alter ego. One night, as Mark, he told a story about meeting a girl at a bus stop in the middle of the night and having sex with her. As a woman, it sounded off. What kind of girl sleeps with a stranger at a dark bus stop? Was he lying? Bragging? Or worse, did he take advantage of someone? Things escalated. He said he was planning to get euthanized for depression. That's not legal in my country. Also WTF. When I told him that, he said a lawyer would help him. What? Then he accused me of stealing his mother's credit card. I've never even met her. Never even been to his city. One night, I had an emergency and asked if he could watch my dog. He agreed. When I came back early the next morning, the place looked clean. He said hi, "How are you?" and left. But his Facebook was open on my computer. Something told me to check. He was messaging one of our mutual friends, calling me a slut, complaining that I gave attention to everyone but him, and that the least I could do was have sex with him. I even found a picture he sent to his friend, where you can clearly see the outside of my house at night. It was sent at 4:53 a.m. I found messages to tons of women where he used my personal trauma to gain sympathy. He told everyone about my business. And then, I found a conversation with a girl we both knew. He told her we were in a long-term relationship, that I cheated on him, and then I apologized to him, that we lived together, that I was toxic and manipulative. I felt sick. I reached out to her. She said she'd always found it weird that he claimed we were dating, but never posted a single photo of us. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. One time, years prior, he used her phone and sent her own nudes to himself while she was taking a shower. She only noticed because he forgot to delete the sent message. That's when I just knew that he did that to me. I had a suspicion that he'd send some pics from my number to his because one folder was open when I never look at my own nudes. That folder had a password. That's when I cut him off, blocked him everywhere, told all our mutual friends. I even messaged him one last time to explain exactly why I never wanted to hear from him again as a courtesy. A year later, he messaged me from a new account. It started off like an apology, but quickly turned into blame. Said I ruined his life, that I should be proud of pushing him into depression, that I lied about not being in a relationship with him, and that he loved me. I blocked him again. Haven't heard from him since. So, Gabriel, Mark, Carl, whatever you want to call yourself, let's not meet again. Story 14. I was young and naive. Now I realize how dangerous this situation was. I am aware this happened ages ago, but am now recollecting bits and pieces from that event and am thankful to be sane and safe. I'm honestly just airing it out so I can get input/opinions because I don't know what to make of it. I'll preface this by saying that this happened a while ago, back in 2019, when I was 16 years old, hence I was very naive and gullible. I am aware that it might not be a human trafficking case, but it does seem suspicious regardless. For context, this happened in a relatively large North American city. It was late December, a few days before Christmas. I had just finished hanging out with my friends and was using public transit, the subway, to get back home. My friends lived in a different area, so I had to travel back alone in that direction. The subway wagons were mostly empty. It was already dark out. I recall it being around 8 to 9 p.m. maybe. I was sitting on an individual seat where the setup was structured in a way that had another seat perpendicular to my current one, which was empty. This one guy, who looked to be relatively young, plopped down on that adjacent seat and greeted me with a smile instantly. I didn't think too much of it at the time, since in all honesty, I thought he was cute. Physically, he had a middle part, chestnut hair, was relatively tall and very slim, and had nice facial features too. I don't remember his face in a very detailed manner, but I remembered thinking he was really cute once again. He was dressed in a sweater and jeans, didn't look dismantled or overly casual either. Upon sitting down, he greeted me smiling, presented himself, and shared his name. We then started making small talk, and he brought up the fact that he had finished university, which made me ask for his age. He claimed to be 24, which seemed to match with his appearance. What really creeps me out is that in response, I had told him I was 16 years old, and he didn't seem even slightly fazed by that. Matter of fact, he was smirking and had formed a small, visible grin, talking about how he missed being this young and advising me to stay in school. He proceeded with asking me about what I was doing alone in the metro, my plans before that, and if I had any plans coming up in the next few hours, to which I stupidly answered no. He then started expressing how his friends had come up with this supposed dare, where he had to bring a random girl over, a complete stranger, to their party/hangout by accosting them randomly, such as this very occasion. I remember finding it hard to believe, so I insisted on going home about a handful of times, to which he started pleading with me, claiming it would be fun, and if I were to be uncomfortable, he would bring me right back to the subway station. I kept insisting that my mom would get mad, and asked him if there was another day where we could do that, but he answered that it was a one-time thing, that it's a very uncommon gathering, that he hasn't seen these friends in a long time and wouldn't see them after the event most probably because of a full schedule. He also kept pushing the fact that he wouldn't keep me up for too long. I eventually gave in. I know, super stupid, I still can't believe it to this day. We had gone through a few subway stations and got off in a pretty desolate area, which was known for its drug use, prostitution, and poverty. But to be frank, I didn't know that at the time, although it was pretty obvious. That specific neighborhood still has a pretty tarnished reputation to this day. The guy, let's call him Ben, then revealed his real name to be different from the one he initially had given me and was seemingly Slavic. The name he revealed is most likely also fake too. He then started asking me pretty intrusive questions such as, what are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What's stressing you out right now? Why did you decide to come along? He claimed to like getting to know people beyond the surface level, hence why he was being this intrusive. I, in all honesty, was a straight-A student, so I simply told him that studies were my main concern as of now, to which he answered that there had to be more than that. We had to be about 15 minutes in at this point when a car slowed down next to us and rolled its windows down. A man let out a hey, but was immediately shooed away by Ben. Ben then told me the man was a supposed John, which I didn't know meant that the driver was essentially a client in that sense. I started to get weary, but still made it to the hangout a few minutes later, which was located in a regular townhouse. It wasn't worn down or anything. I was greeted by maybe 5 to 6 dudes, who were seemingly over 25. 2 of them looked above 30 as well. They all stared at me down and immediately asked how old I was, and I told them I was 16. One of the guys seemed sort of fazed and let out a "come on man, that's my sister's age. They might even be in the same high school." They all kind of laughed it off and moved on. They never spoke about it again and barely asked me any questions except for, how did you guys meet? Also, it was obvious that someone's dad owned the place as an old man was dozing off on the couch. We were all gathered around a dinner table. The host served me some food along with the other guests, but I refused to eat as I was honestly starting to feel a bit queasy about the situation. After everyone, except me, finished eating, we all went upstairs. Ben started playing the guitar, and another man joined in by playing some keys on a piano. They then asked me to film them using Ben's phone, so I did. When that was going on, I honestly started getting terrible vibes and felt the need to leave, so I put the phone down and slowly made my way through the frame of the door. One of the older guys was standing near it and asked me what's up and if I was enjoying their company. We started talking for a minute, and he claimed to be an accountant. He then started leaning in and tried to slightly hover over me against the door frame. However, I stepped back into the staircase and made it to the front door, opened it, and went out to the driveway. Luckily, the door wasn't locked. Ben followed and asked me if I wanted to leave. I immediately said yeah, and this time, he didn't insist on bringing me back in. I should also add that right before leaving, I had told Ben that my mom was relentlessly calling me and was worried, to which he obliged. On our way back, he proceeded to ask me if I was genuinely 16 and not below that. He told me that if he were my dad, he would never let me out of sight again, because what I just did, which was going to the party in the first place, was the dumbest thing he'd seen any girl do, especially since I had no reason to do that, according to him. Once he accompanied me back to the subway station, I asked him for his Snapchat. I was a complete moron, or any type of social media he had. He told me he doesn't use his phone like that, and was fully off the grid. I went back home and never heard him again. Although I didn't get conventionally harassed, violence, sexual endeavors, etc., and it's a pretty outdated happening, I'm honestly scared I could have been a potential rape or a human trafficking victim. The latter might be a stretch, but you never know. I want to know if there's any way I could leave an anonymous tip to the city or something. I was searching through public records, but couldn't find anything. Story 15. A man with a jaw hung open in my backyard. Surprisingly, this is one of those stories I forgot about until a few days ago when I was talking to a school friend on call, and I got reminded of this. She was pretty freaked when I told her, and so did I, thinking about it again. This happened when I was roughly maybe 7 or 8, so some of the details are fuzzy, but I remember it pretty vividly. This may seem like an unimportant context, but my family had just moved to America and were renting the top portion of your regular suburban house in a pretty safe cul-de-sac. I had friends that were triplets about 3 or 4 houses down. Not far at all. Every day I'd go hang out with them, and around 9 or 10 in the night, my older brother, around 11 or 12 I'd say, would make the 2-minute walk and come get me and walk me home since I was pretty young. One night, he came to get me as usual. The sun wasn't fully down, but it was getting pretty dark. We started down the walk as normal when he started casting glances over his shoulder. I didn't really notice until he shoved me hard away from the sidewalk and between 2 houses. Each house had a huge fence that separated their backyard. Not ours, though, and he made me crouch behind the fence. I remember being really scared, but more so confused since I had no damn idea what the hell was going on. More specifically, he was a pretty big prankster. Once he convinced me my older sister crashed her car into the ocean, so I didn't really believe him when he turned and said, "Walk behind the houses. I think someone's following us." Looking back now, he was probably trying to keep me calm. However, whatever calm was left in my tiny 8-year-old body was gone the moment I turned around and looked. The man had followed us behind the houses, and he was just by the edge of a few houses down near a different fence line. He had a black hoodie on, with the hood up, black sweatpants, and white sneakers. I have pretty bad eyesight now due to some health problems, but back then it was crystal clear. And I could see, with horrifying clarity, that his jaw was hung open. Like he was just standing there, with his jaw hung open. It was horrifying. I think now that I'm older, maybe he had some kind of medical condition that affected his jaw. Or maybe he did crack. I don't know. But back then I could have sworn on God I was seeing some kind of demon. Anyway, my brother, when he saw me looking and getting ready to freak out, told me to just run as fast as I can to our house. We booked it. Neither of us looked back, but we were scared out of our minds. Like I said, we only rented the top portion of the house, so the bottom, with the sliding door in the backyard, belonged to some other tenant. I don't remember if she was home or not, but I remember tugging that thing open and locking it as fast as I can. And when I looked up, he was there in the yard, a little way away from the door. staring at us. Me and my brother told my sister and my mother immediately my father was away on a work trip, but nothing came of it. Not until the day after. We went to go meet my dad at his warehouse, which had a small live-in portion above it where we lazed around until he was ready to head home with us. Around dusk, he came up and told us we might have to wait since the police were here. He walked us around to the back window of the small area to show us police all around the backyard area of the warehouses. There were a few in a line, to a white van parked on the grass by the edge of the woods. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I don't remember many details of what actually happened, but I do remember my dad, who hadn't been told about the day prior, telling us that they found a man and a woman in the van. The man, he said, had his mouth hung wide open. He seemed really disturbed telling me about the whole thing and wouldn't answer any more questions about the woman. Maybe she was dead. I've got zero ideas. I didn't know they were arrested on trespassing charges. I don't know anything else, and I haven't asked about it, and I doubt he'd remember. It's been over a decade, and he's pushing 70. But it freaks me out to this day. I still can't believe it happened, and I don't have any answers for it. I talked to my brother briefly about it in hopes he remembered more than I do, but all I got was a long tirade about whatever medical condition the guy probably had for his mouth to be like that. He's an annoying medical student now. Sometimes I think maybe he didn't mean any harm and was just drugged out of his mind, but this was like in the world's safest neighborhood and doesn't explain why or how he showed up at my dad's workplace. Edit. If anyone is curious, I asked around a little for more information. I wasn't able to find a lot, but I found out why my father moved away from that warehouse. The police found a dead body in a car near us. I'm not sure if this is the same van or not, or when that happened, but take that as you will. Story 16. A man was living in my basement for months. You hear stories about people unknowingly squatting in other people's homes, but never think it would actually happen to you. It happened to me. About 10 years ago, I, 31F, was living alone in a two-family house on the second floor with my then toddler. For the story to make sense, I need to try and explain the layout and the backstory. My brother's close friend at the time lived on the first floor and is the one who referred me to the landlord. We had private front entrances, but a shared back entrance with a staircase that ran from the basement all the way to the second floor. I would frequently leave my back door unlocked because I had a habit of locking my keys in the house, and my downstairs neighbor could let me in the back door. The downstairs neighbor had a friend who was kind of down and out. He had a history of substance abuse, but was supposedly clean at the time. He was a relatively nice guy, and my neighbor had been letting him stay on his couch for a while. The neighbor had a 4-year-old daughter, and having someone constantly sleeping on the couch without any plans of finding a permanent living situation was becoming disruptive to their everyday lives. Neighbor tells him he needs to go. It was summertime, so the friend decided he's going to sleep on the couch on our covered porch. We told him that's not acceptable, and when we asked him to leave, we meant the property in general. It had also become abundantly clear that he was using again, and his behavior had become somewhat erratic. He was also making a lot of unsolicited advances on me, which had become increasingly uncomfortable. He wasn't happy, but it wasn't our problem. He stopped coming around, and we no longer saw him around town. Fast forward a month or two, and I noticed things going missing. Jewelry, small amounts of money left around the house, lighters. Inconsequential items I had written off as lost. This house was old with paper-thin walls. The back door in question was right next to the bathroom along one side of the shower. It also made a very distinct noise when opened. One day my car was at the mechanic, so it probably appeared that I wasn't home. I'm showering, and I swear I hear the back door open. I freeze, practically stop breathing, but after a few minutes when nobody murdered me American Psycho style, I wrote it off again. I'm a notorious wimp and had a history since childhood of thinking every strange noise was a potential murderer. This was a long time ago, so I don't remember the exact length of time, possibly a few weeks. The basement was really big and shared, and the landlord also stored stuff down there. It was very packed with some very dark corners. We rarely went down there. The landlord comes by one day and goes down to the basement. He hears a strange noise, grabs a baseball bat, and finds this man in our basement. The man pushed the landlord down, ran out of the house, and down the street. We call the police, who find him hiding in a trash can around the corner. Can't make this shit up. Upon further investigation, We found the basement window had been ever so slightly propped open. In a back corner behind some boxes was a nest of blankets filled with our missing items plus some drug paraphernalia. It reminded me of Creature's nest under the stairs at Grimmauld Place, if you know, you know. He had also left his flip phone behind in the chaos, where we found a lot of pictures of me sleeping. This man had been high on crack, living in our basement and regularly entering my apartment both when I wasn't home and when I was sleeping for months. While he seemed like a nice guy, he was regularly high on hard drugs, and that changes people. I still get chills knowing he could have done anything to me and my child, and I would have never seen it coming. The worst part is that the charges somehow got dropped, and they never even consulted us, and they never gave us an option as the victims. This was not even close to his first criminal offense. My state is notoriously soft on nonviolent criminals, regardless of whether it was a victimless crime or not. My local police department is also notorious for making deals in exchange for information on even small-time dealers. We didn't get any justice. Luckily, this didn't have much lasting effect on my mental health, just more of a WTF, can't believe that really happened. It feels like a fever dream. Jason, let's not meet.